All right, guys, you ready? Ready. Excuse me, sir, in the front. Can you please be quiet? Mr. Nunez. Thank you. So my name's Chuck. I've been making money online since like 1996. For lack of a better term, I call myself a serial entrepreneur. I own numerous companies, buy websites. I don't often sell them, but I buy them. We've got Jason Yellowitz from Quiet Light Brokerage. He is a senior broker, a author, and an all-around good guy. We got David. I'm not sure I could say as much about him. He's actually put together an actual summit on buying and selling websites. He owns a lot of companies. He does a lot of cool stuff. And then we got Kyle down at the end, Grand Emperor. He's a serial entrepreneur as well. We're all kind of serial entrepreneurs, and that's how we got into this stuff, because we just like to do a lot of different things. So you may be asking yourself why I want to buy a website. Okay, let me put my timer on here.
I do.
So it could be simply for cash flow, right? So you've got some extra money and you want to invest it in something. You don't want to put it in a CD where you're going to get like 1%, if that. You don't want to put it in the stock market where you're going to get like maybe 10 to 15% on average. You want to invest it in something to where maybe you have some direct control. So you buy a company. At the high end, you're going to pay 3 times net yearly. So if the site's making $1,000 a month, maybe you pay $36,000 for it. On the high end, you can get it at the low end for like 6 months net. So maybe it's for synergy. We got a friend who owns, or his girlfriend owns a salon. There. And he found a website that was selling salon products. He's already got a staff that are experts in the salon industry, right? Because they already own a salon. So if for somebody like me, it wouldn't be a good buy. I don't know anything about salon products, but for somebody like him, it's a no-brainer, right? And from what I understand, he purchased the site last month. He's already made 20% in the first month. So if you annualize that, he's getting a 260% return on the acquisition. And that's first month without even really doing anything to increase it. So there's synergies. There's untapped potential. I have another friend that I was talking to, and it was like one of these aha moments that I already know this, right? And we already know this, but we don't really think about it in these terms. He had a website. He had a certain amount of traffic. He was on an affiliate network, and he was making a certain amount of money. He switched to a different affiliate network, and he got 10 times as much money for the same amount of traffic. I said, wait a second. If you just got 10 times just by switching affiliates, why not go to the person or look for the old affiliate that you're at, look for everybody who's promoting that guy's product, and go and offer to buy those people's websites and flip them onto this new affiliate. Now all of a sudden, if this site was making $100, it's going to make $1,000. And you can even pay up and pay a top dollar for it. But if you can make 10 times as much money, like that's some real power right there. There's also in-house link networks. So people want to buy links, or they want to get links to their websites. You might buy a PR5 link for like $100. Well, I can buy a PR5 website for $1,000. So even if I were to put one link on that website that's pointing to me, that's like a $1,200 value that I just bought for $1,000. Now, what if I have 3 or 5 websites and I put all links to all those websites? And what if like my competitor's on that website with a link? What happens to his link when I buy the website? It's probably not going to be there anymore. So reasons to sell. Like, why would you want to sell after all that good stuff? Maybe you want to cash out. Maybe you want to put a down payment on a house, or you're just tired of that niche and you just want to get out. So maybe you're going to cash out. Maybe it's to redeploy capital. So thinking back on that site where I bought it for, I didn't buy it, but you bought it for $100, and now it's worth, it's making $1,000 instead of making $100 a month. You get your 10 times. Well, you just increase the value of that site from being worth, let's say, $3,600 to $36,000. What if you see a deal that you could do that same thing and that site's $36,000? You can sell this site, get your $36,000 out, and redeploy it into a new site, and then build that one up. and take that one up and do the same thing you did. What is the declining market? So a lot of places or a lot of sites that we buy are on Flippa, which is an auction website. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. I saw one the other day, and it was like survivalkit.com or something like that, okay? We all know that the world didn't end when the Mayan calendar ended, right? So I assume, or I shouldn't say I assume, but there's the chance that maybe that market's going to decline, the survival kit, because people aren't freaking out that the world's good anymore, right? I don't know of any other dates that are coming up in the near future where the world's supposed to end. So maybe that might be a declining market, and that might be a reason to get out, because you want to sell when you're still on an upslope. You don't want to sell after you've already, started going back down with your income. Maybe it's also just you want to focus on your core business. I don't know about you guys, but I juggle like 50 million different sites, and sometimes my real money sites start to suffer because I'm not focusing on them. So maybe you just want to stop juggling so much and sell a few and get back focused on your core business. So where to buy and sell? There's auctions, so there's Flippa, right? It's the #1 place. They got tons of stuff you can look at, but I will say it gets kind of addictive, and you just have to be careful. I don't go to Flip anymore personally. I tasked my assistant to go look, and she only brings me the good deals, and then I only go and look at those deals, because I will spend all day just looking through there at different deals. And it's neat to look at different deal flow just to see what's what and what's out there. Somebody who's just starting up is Vinforo. They're trying to be a competitor of Flippa. They've only got a couple sites listed, but maybe you could find a good deal on there. You can also look on eBay. I've never seen anything of quality on eBay, but there are people who try to sell their websites there. Okay? Then we've got some brokers. We've got Quiet Light Brokerage, which is here with Jason. It's a great, reputable company. Then there's some of these other guys, Latona's, I've met him, and some of these other brokers out there. You look at their deals, see what they've got to sell, and work with them. The reason you'd want to go with say a broker versus an auction site, typically if I'm buying a site and if I'm going to go for an auction, it's going to be something in the range of maybe $100 to maybe $100,000 on the high end, maybe more. But when I'm looking for sites that are $50,000 up to a couple $1 million, I don't want to buy it on Flippa. I want to work with a broker, because they're going to do some of the due diligence up on the front end. They're going to make sure that I'm not wasting my time talking to somebody who's just full of it. They're going to have verified a lot of the information, and it's worth. You're paying for it inadvertently, right? Because they're getting a commission based on the sale. But it's just kind of one of those extra steps to make sure that you're not going to get scammed. Some of the other marketplaces are cashforyoursite.com. It's a great website. It's right here on my chart. So maybe if you come up with a deal that you need to close on tomorrow and you need some capital and you need to get that money quick, and you have some websites that you need to sell to get that capital to purchase the new one, you want to close real fast. That's what we do. We'll close in 48 hours on a deal. If it's the right thing. And we have a network of buyers that we can, if somebody brings us a website, we can give it to our network and see if anybody else is interested that can close quickly. Buying and selling websites, that's Dave's site up here. Similar stuff. He buys websites from people. He also has some courses, information. Biz Buy Sell, they're more of a offline broker, but they also sell some online stuff. Then you got the miscellaneous stuff like Craigslist. You can find some good deals, but you have to be careful because there's a reason they're on Craigslist. Either they don't know about Flip or any of the other stuff, or they're just trying to scam you. So you just got to figure out which one of those two it is. There's forums. You can contact site owners directly. Networking, right? We're all here. Now, we all know each other. Maybe now you know that I buy sites. Maybe you bring a site to me and say, hey, I'm looking to sell. Maybe you ask me, hey, can I be in your network? And, you want to see some deal flow of things that are brought to me or any of the other speakers. So how do you prepare a site for sale? First and foremost, I always want to see a site that has Google Analytics on it. I don't want to see web stats or any of this other stuff that's server side, because it's just so easily faked. And you can fake the Google AdSense, but it requires a little more effort, and you get a lot more information with the Google AdSense. You want to create a verifiable profit loss statement for 2 to 3 years. The more information, the better. You want to provide all the information that is all your income streams, all the money that's going out, how much you're paying for your content, just everything that involves your business. So web hosting, just everything. You want to tweak your website to increase revenue. So at the very last minute, you want to just make sure you got everything done and try to get that thing to be on an uptick, so when you sell, it looks like it's up, because nobody wants to buy a site that's going down. Everybody wants to buy something that's an asset that's increasing in value. You want to audit your website and look for obvious errors. Right? It's just like when you sell your house, the last two. You know, it's like there's all this stuff that you know you should have done that you never did to your house. You got a squeaky door, all these things. You really want to just kind of, you know, check off those few things that are just weird stuff that you haven't fixed, but you know you should. You want to be credible and honest. When people ask you questions or when you ask them questions, you need to answer honestly, even if it's bad stuff. Because if I ask somebody a question and I find out they're lying to me, the deal's done. Like, I don't know if I can trust them now. And when you're dealing with like a digital asset, it's not like just real property, right? It's digital. So there's a lot of trust involved in it, and it's just kind of a scary thing sometimes, especially if somebody's lying to you about things. So here's some of the due diligence tools. One of the big pieces of due diligence, I would say, is just checking their backlinks and seeing what it's all about, okay? My assistant came up to me and she's like, hey, I found this great site. They got a link from Harvard, all this stuff. And it was just this random stupid thing that there's no way somebody from Harvard is going to be linking to it. There's no way there's a link from Harvard. Show it to me. So she shows it to me, and we look at the page, and it's not in the content. All of a sudden, you see comments. 1,500 comments. It was one of 1,500 comments. Like, is that a valuable link? No. Google knows, right? And with all of the stuff that's going on right now with Google and making all these changes, you really want to make sure that they have got good quality backlinks. You don't want stuff that's all forum spam and stuff like that. You want to just do a lot of due diligence, make sure that it looks like some real backlinks. I mean, there could be some stuff in there that's, you know, questionable, but just be aware, because it's very important. Also, you want to be aware if they've got like 2 PR7 links that are pointing to them. Everybody knows PR, PageRank from Google. If they got 2 PR7 links that are pointing to them, do they own those links? Are they only pointing them to it to increase the PR of that website? Are they going to remove them when they've sold the site? These are all things you got to think about, right? Have they bought those links? These are the things you want to ask. So SEMrush, Majestic, these are all some other companies that do, you know, backlink and other various due diligence. SpyFu. So does this site do AdWords right now? Are they doing, you know, paying for traffic? SpyFu is a great tool for looking at that. If they're not, you can see what their competitors are doing and see if it's a worthwhile market to get into. You can see the cost of stuff. You can look for, you know, unseen potential. You can also look to see, it shows you like stuff they've advertised for the past, and if they no longer advertise for it. So you can see what they've tried and what they no longer advertise for. That way you know, okay, I was thinking, oh, I want to try this, but it's not worth it because they've already tried it and clearly it didn't work. Ban check. This shows you for like an AdSense site. You want to see if they're in like a secondary market for AdWord or for advertising, and you're like, well, I'm just going to switch it to AdSense. I'll make a lot more money. Well, why aren't they on AdSense? You can ask them, but you can also check to see if they were banned. And this isn't necessarily going to be 100% true, but it's going to give you, you know, at least one piece of data that maybe, hopefully, can do a red flag if it's there. SEO mastering. They have a bunch of cool tools. One of them is just to check PR to see if they're faking, if they're doing like weird 301, 302 redirects to increase the PR when it's not really that. Domain tools, you can look at other domains that people own. You can see what other niches they're in. So maybe they own five websites in the same niche, right? But they're only telling you about one of them. Use this and you can see if they have one server that's got all this different stuff on it. And you can see if they're going to be competing against you. Do you want to buy a site where the person's just going to keep recreating the same site over and over again? Copyscape, check for, you know, stolen, plagiarized information. Compete, archive. Archive's great. You can see previous versions of the site. You can see what they've done in the past. You know, sometimes you can just find some really sketchy stuff that's happened in the past. So additional due diligence. So if you're on Flippa, I would definitely read the comments that other people have made. If you see somebody with a bunch of comments and the owner of the site who's selling has deleted a bunch of people's comments, that should probably set off a red flag. Why are they deleting comments from people? What did those comments say? You can also just find stuff where people will out people on Flippa. They'll say, hey, why are you doing this? And the stuff that maybe you never even thought of, but they're doing something sketchy. So you want to research the seller also, not just the company. You want to see if it's a reputable person, right? You really want to know who you're working with, who you're dealing with, so that you know if you can trust them or not, or if you shouldn't trust them. You want to ask questions you already know the answers to. That's a good one. Set them up to lie to you. Ask them a question. See if you can get them to lie to you. If they lie to you, walk away. Ask the seller to add you to their Google Analytics. Most people are pretty willing to, and you can make it, you know, a condition of the sale. Say, I want you to add my Gmail account to your analytics so I can look around. It's better than just having a screenshot because, you know, they could fake the screenshot. They could do all kinds of, you know, weird stuff. Ask about potential revenue streams. I know somebody who sold a site, and the owner, the new owner, asked the person, oh, you know, what kind of, after they made the purchase, what kind of stuff were you going to do to the site? She's like, oh, I already sold you the site. You didn't pay for me to tell you what I was going to do with it. It's like, really? Like, you won't give him that information? No. Why should I give him that information? So make sure you ask questions up front, because you don't know what kind of seller this is. You don't know if they're going to be, you know, good to you after the sale. Ask that they verify all claims with verifiable information, right? So if they say, oh, I made this much money, okay, well, show me your bank statements, show me your merchant account statements, show me your PayPal, show me. Get them to verify everything, right? Have them do a shared screen where they log in and they start logging into all your accounts, and you're watching them do this live and make them click on things. And don't tell them ahead of time that you're going to do this. Say, hey, I want to log into some stuff maybe. Can we do, you know, where I can see your screen? And then make them do it on the fly so that way they can't go in and fake stuff, you know, and make them go to some websites that they're not anticipating you asking them to go to, just to make sure everything is, you know, somewhat legit. Ask about anomalies, right? Look for weird stuff and just ask. Ask about the skills and time required to operate a site. Are you buying a job or are you buying a website or an investment? Okay? If I buy a site that's $100, but it takes me 40 hours a week to run it, that's stupid, right? Why would you do that? You're buying an investment. Sometimes people will try to sell a site, and even if it's like a $30,000, oh, it's making 30 grand. How long does it take you to operate? It takes me 40 hours a week. Well, then you're buying yourself a job, right? Is that what you want? If it is, great. If it's not, then, you know. So ask. Ask everything and anything you can think about, but you really just want to make sure you ask questions. I think communication is the key, right? You want to agree to specific terms and a transition plan before you agree to purchase the site. You really just want to lay everything out, know what's going to happen. That way there's no miscommunication. You know, after the, you know, when you've already told them you're going to buy, you've already put the money in escrow, you know, what's going to happen? You got to figure out what's your pain point. What's the high value, the low value? If you're buying a $100 site, are you going to make them, you know, sign like a 10-page contract? Probably not, right? Who cares? It's $100. But if it's a $1 million website, you better believe I'm going to have lawyers involved. I'm going to make them sign all kinds of contracts, all this stuff. So just have an idea of what your pain, your threshold is for an acceptable loss. Okay? Have the contract prepared, stipulating the terms of the sale and how the transfer is going to take place, including time frames and consequences. Right? So if they fail to meet certain obligations of them, what is the consequence for that? What are the payment terms, right? So maybe you want to buy the site and you say, okay, I'm going to give you X dollars up front, pay you over the next 10 years, 5%, blah, blah, blah. You know, figure out the terms. Is the seller going to support you after? Non-compete, non-disclosure, non-performance. Add all these things into your contract. Sending payments, right? Escrow, PayPal. If you're gonna get the stuff after you send the money, use something like this. If you're sending the money, if you get the stuff and then you're sending the money, then you can pay cash, check, wire transfer, Western Union. But those are no recourse actions, right? You send them that money, it's gone. So you want to make sure you have all the stuff you need and that it's all legitimate, that everything's, you know, all your I's are crossed, you know, T's and all that good stuff. So next, what do we have? Dave's going to talk.
All right, so I'm going to talk about valuations, and what I'm going to do is talk about it from the experience of my experience. So there's brokers up here that work in certain types of transactions that I don't work in, so the valuations I deal with may be different than what he deals with, right? And to give you an idea of my experience, I typically buy sites in the ranges of anywhere from $1 all the way up to $200,000. That's my price range, that's where I work in. So when I talk about valuations, those are the types of deals I'm talking about. So let me ask you this question, though. I want to know who's in the audience. How many of you own more than one website right now? Wow, okay. And how many of you have bought a website before? Not a domain name, but bought a site from somebody else. That's great. How many of you have sold a site? Okay? So how many of you that own multiple sites, if I said to you right now, I'll pay you $5 million for your website, will come up here and sign the agreement right now? $5 million bucks. Hey, who would not do it? Okay, great. I got 3. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to explain to you all why you wouldn't want to sell your website for $5 million while I present this here in a second, okay? So follow me as we go along. First off is, what is the site's value? The site's value is whatever anybody's willing to pay for it. It's really what it comes down to. And what you got to think about, I had an offline business. It was started as an online business back in 1999. And I took it online by selling a book online. That was my product. And it was a book teaching people how to go get financing and credit and build that for their businesses and go get angel funding and all that. And we took the website and ended up creating a service-based company around that. Ended up with about 50 employees. We sold it in 2008. It was actually here in Vegas for about 8 years. And what it came down to is when I went and looked for a buyer, I had certain buyers that would be willing to pay me probably 20% of what I really sold it for. And that was the main market that would have bought it. But the one who ended up buying it and paying a lot more than anybody else was somebody who saw a synergistic way of looking at that business, because they had a huge amount of clients that they could sell our product to. And they knew immediately that they would end up generating a lot more sales. So it always comes down to you just need one buyer, right? You don't need a bunch of buyers to figure out what you're going to get for it. So as long as you have one buyer at the price you're willing to accept, that's all you really need. So there's 2 types of buyers, though, and that's what you got to understand, is there's the strategic buyer, and then there's the investment or the investor buyer. In most cases, about 75% of the sites I buy are up to this point, although I'm switching to more of a strategic now that we've got some sites in place. Up to this point, we've been investment buyers. And let me ask you, if you were a strategic buyer or an investment buyer, which one do you think values sites probably at a higher value?
Strategic.
Strategic buyers, right? So, and you got to understand that when you're out there looking to buy a site or to sell a site, hopefully, right? If you're selling sites and you know there's a strategic buyer on the line and there's an investment buyer, I'd spend all my time with the strategic buyer, not the investment buyer. So, as I said, strategic buyers typically place higher values. This is one example just of many out there, internet brands. If you don't know who they are, go look them up. They started with one website and they buy strategically. They ended up going public and then ended up selling it to a private investment firm for $600 million or something like that. And it just goes to show me how big this market can be. If you can go out there and start acquiring sites in one particular niche, grow it, there's some huge opportunities there. So when it comes to valuations, investment buyers typically buy sites based on specific multiples. And I'd say it in general terms, and again, this is my experience, is 1 to 3 years times the gross revenue is what it is. That's pretty typical. So you as a strategic buyer are typically getting your money back within 1 to 3 years on average. On average, I'd say in most cases, we're typically looking at 18 times the monthly is the high end that we typically would buy in. If obviously we can buy lower than that, obviously we're looking at that as well. I've bought sites as low as 2 times the monthly net revenue. Okay, so somebody was willing to actually sell that to me. So if it was making $500 a month, I bought it for $1,000. So there are deals like that out there. It takes time to find them, but you can find them. Examples of sites that have sold, give you an idea of sites that are out there. I don't know particular revenue models behind these at the time, but I just wanted to show you that there are sites out there still selling for significant amounts of money. I mean, and these are probably brokers that are brokering these kinds of deals. And there's a few more there. Now, what are they looking for when they determine value? And when they're looking at valuations, you're looking at age of the website itself, right? How long has it been around? You're looking at the amount of traffic that goes to that site. You're looking at the profitability of the site. You're looking at the niche that it's in. Certain niches I will value higher than I will other niches. Analytics, obviously you have to go in and dive into all of the analytics, is what Chuck just mentioned. We look at the domain name itself, and then we also look at how the site is monetized. So I did a presentation last week, and somebody asked me, which sites or which niches do you value higher? And in our case, it always came down to how that site was monetized. If it was strictly just one monetization method, we may value it actually higher because we know there's other ways to generate revenue on that site than just one. So we could value the site higher because we know we could immediately turn that into a higher profitability on that site by adding a couple other revenue streams to it. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the things that aren't relevant, and this is where the negotiation piece becomes really tricky with people. We actually just got through a deal that fell through because the guy that wanted to sell the site to us had 8 years into the site. And when he has 8 years of blood, sweat, and tears into the site, what do they think the value is? They think it's way up here. And the reality is it's only doing a certain amount of revenue. And I don't care that you put in 100 grand into programmers to build a site when it doesn't have any revenue. It's still, I mean, so what? You haven't proven necessarily that there's traffic going to come to it with a $100,000 program behind it. So the traffic, the revenue, those are things that matter. The irrelevant things are how much money you've actually dumped into the site. It doesn't really matter to me as a strategic buyer or an investment buyer, okay? Now, if I was looking to buy a site strictly for the asset itself, that was like some type of program behind it, and that's what I was buying, well, that's a different story. You're buying an asset for a specific reason. When we're talking about websites, you're really basing it on how much traffic, how much revenue, and the potential, and obviously the history of it as well. So whatever that perceived value that that seller has, in a lot of cases is not relevant to me as a buyer. I could kind of care less what they think it's worth. I have a perceived value of it. Now, how do I actually go through and determine the value of a site? We actually have a spreadsheet, and we did what we thought was the best approach, which was to do whatever Google does in their analytics. We thought, well, if they look at backlinks, we're going to look at backlinks. If they look at amount of time on a site, we're going to look at that. If it's bounce rate, we want to look at that. So we did all the things that all these marketers and all the gurus say that Google's basing their algorithm on. We listed them all inside of a spreadsheet. And then we also put in niche, we put in the monetization methods, all those things, and then created values next to each one. And then have one of our assistants goes through and actually scores the websites that we look at, and it kicks back a value and a price point on it and says, here's the multiples based on that you would end up having attached to this. And so when it comes to us as a buyer, we're looking at it saying, okay, well, our spreadsheet and our system says it should be a multiple of 12 to 18. So we're not negotiating anything higher than that. So, and anybody can do that. It's a pretty simple process. You just go find out what everybody's looking for websites and how they value them and dump it into a spreadsheet. Assigning value, it's not the price, it's the terms. Okay, so what I mentioned earlier is that I would buy your site for how much? $5 million. Okay, so, and many of you other than 3 said that they would take the deal. Here's what I would do though. I'll give you $1 today, and I'll pay you 10% of the net profit until you reach $5 million. Now, how many of you are still in on the deal? Nobody, right? So I could come up with any amount on the price, and it doesn't really matter. The price is irrelevant in almost every case, okay? It's the terms that matter. And I've, in the one particular deal that I did back in 2008 where we sold the offline business, it came to something like that, and not in that aggressive of a viewpoint, but when they came up with the price, they threw out the price up front, and they sat there on it. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. I'm totally excited about it. And they waited probably 30 seconds before they got my reaction. And I said, so, well, what are the terms? Well, now here's the terms. It's a 5-year earn out. It does this, and they went through all, and I'm like, oh man, it's not as great of a deal as I thought. Even though it ended up being a good deal once we got the negotiations done, hearing the terms makes it so much different. Everybody understand that? If you get that one thing out of all this, that to me is the most important one. Now, I did some valuations on Flippa, and I analyzed 50 blogs over the last 6 months, and just kind of to see what kind of the valuations were on there. So if you're looking to buy some things on Flippa, this was one way to look at it. And what I found is that it was It's about 15 times the monthly profit of that website is what they were selling for. Give you an idea, okay? Now, in a lot of cases, you can find things cheaper, and in a lot of cases, you can find things more expensive. But it gives you a lot of people just want to know, well, what's that multiple? Well, I did a little quick study, and that's what I found, okay? How to increase the value? Valuable content, obviously, is key. Second is increase the traffic to that website once you get it. Properly monetize the site, which I think is the most important one, because even if you have low amount of traffic, if you can increase the monetization on that, increase the value of that, you're going to end up increasing that value of that website dramatically, okay? And obviously going back to perceived value versus actual value. Check my time, I'm almost here. So key metrics for buyers. For me as a buyer, things that I look at page rank. It's not the most important thing to me and not necessarily even on the top 10 list, but page rank is definitely one of the things that we will look at and create a value to. It's one of the metrics we look at. The other one is domain authority and page authority. So the page authority and domain authority are, to me, critical pieces when we start strategically buying. So if you don't know how to find domain authority or page authority, just go online and look up how to find page authority. But those are critical in terms of valuing a site. I'll tell you right now, those are, to me, some of the most important ones. And obviously now social followers or social following engagement that site might have. A site might have 50,000 Facebook likes or something like that, and those are now very, very important to us as well. And that's it for valuations. And now Kyle's coming up to talk about his here. Flip over to yours.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Kyle Wakefield, and I've been doing this for several years now, buying and selling, predominantly buying. And I want to talk to you about two topics that, to me, are kind of the crux of this whole process, which is negotiation. And then a second one, which I like to do, is finding sites to buy that aren't for sale, which seems kind of like an interesting thing when you first hear it, but it's really, in my mind, the best way to buy sites. So I want to start with negotiation. The first thing that's important to remember when you're negotiating, and I tried to pick things that were universally true, that weren't just focused on buyers or sellers, but were kind of things you could just all take away. You really have to go into it thinking it's not a zero-sum game. There are times when you're negotiating something where you feel almost that for you to win, the other person has to lose. And really nothing could be further from the truth when it comes to a good deal for a good site that you're buying. You don't want to go into it treating the other person like you want to extract every ounce of money and value and for yourself. And if you do, you're going to find that it's not going to be a good process, and most likely it's not going to end up being a good deal for you or for the person who's selling. Ways you can kind of help address some of that are just you want to be professional with people at all times. I've done this for several years, and there's been, along the span of that, I've dealt with people that have been all across the board in terms of emotions and how they're professional and how they treat me and vice versa. I always try to be professional, calm, collected in how I'm interacting with them, especially because the main way I buy sites is through soliciting people that are not selling, that are not listing their site for sale. And that creates a whole different set of challenges when you've got to try to get someone to the frame of mind of being okay with the notion of selling their site. So just be professional at all times. The other thing that I think is, for me personally, and again, I'm kind of like David. I like to spend a lot of time, I know David personally. We've done some business together, and we both are people that like to talk about just things we've experienced, and as opposed to theory and things that sound good on paper, but things that we've actually gone through and done. I've found that whenever you are dealing with a site, you want to be professional at all times. It's always good to kind of know when and how to take things to the next level. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, what I mean specifically with that. But you also want to make sure you state your values, your intentions with the people up front, so they know where you stand. They know what you're trying to get out of the deal. And you also want to make sure that you understand what their values and intentions are. Whether you know it or not, people are not always motivated by money. in this. It's not about, hey, I want to get the highest price for my site. It could be a number of things. It could be they want to just have more time. They want to move on to some other project. They want to just diversify some of the sites they have. There could be a number of reasons. So we tend to get wrapped up with money and thinking that money is kind of the hinge-pin that all of this rests upon. But it's really not. So keep that in mind as you're talking with prospective sellers, that may not be money that's their motivating factor. And you want to make sure, as the buyer, you can find what is that motivating factor. Because the quicker you find that, the quicker you can present yourself as the person that can help them get that. And again, like David said, the key in this business is the best possible terms at the best possible price. You know, we get hung up on price, and we think that's kind of the big thing. It is to a point, but you also want to make sure that the terms that you are putting together in that deal, those are equally, if not more important, to make sure it's beneficial for you and the seller. How many of you guys have heard of this phrase, the frog in the boiling water analogy? If you put the frog in, you turn it up. Of course, it's a metaphor we hear all the time, and I was curious if it was true or not. I went and Googled it. It looks like it's not really true. It's just a metaphor people use.
I'm glad you Googled it and you didn't try it.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't try it. But what I found is that it's a good metaphor that applies to what we're talking about here. In that when I'm dealing with someone, when I'm negotiating with them about price or terms or any of this kind of thing, I kind of think of this picture in my head. It's like I don't want to quickly jump to the end. I don't want to quickly take them to a place that they're not, or I'm not ready to go to yet. But I kind of want to slowly turn up the heat and know when to take the conversation to the next level. Know when to move from just the kind of initial connection, hey, how's it going? What's the story kind of thing, to, okay, let's start talking specifics. Let's start talking about price. And I kind of call this, you want to be in control while making them feel like they're in control, if that makes sense. I don't mean be manipulative. I don't mean be subversive. But especially if you're talking about high value sites, you've got people that understand there is value in what they have. So you don't want to come on like you are the guy who knows everything and you're telling them how things are going to be and you're dictating this, that, and the other. You kind of want to feel them out a little bit, see where they are, see what they're open to, and then try to control the broader situation while giving them control on some of the smaller things in between. Another big important thing to remember is that in negotiation, it's a dance, it's not a sprint. You know, I cannot tell you the number of times, and I've messed this up myself personally, when I've tried to go into something and quickly jump to price, and it just completely alienates the person I'm trying to deal with, because they're like, well, I don't even know you, so why would I start talking about that kind of stuff yet? This also plays heavily in with how I buy sites, which is kind of the next part I want to talk about. Before I get there, I want to ask you this question. I don't know if y'all have heard this statement before, but would you say this is true or false? He who names the first price loses. Who would say that is a true statement? Okay, who would say that's a false statement? About the same. Who doesn't really care? Who doesn't really know? Okay. You know, the guy that kind of showed me how to do this business, that was a big saying he had. And so, of course, when I heard it, I was like, well, okay, that must be how it is. He who names the first price loses. So I would go into every deal like consciously like, okay, don't say price, don't say price, don't say price. And what I found is that, you know, that works to a point. But at the end of the day, you know, you don't want to be so guarded with everything you say that you come off like some robot who has zero personality and can't relate to people. So I would say, generally speaking, if I'm the buyer and I'm soliciting someone to buy their site, I try to not name a price unless they absolutely want me to. But here's what will happen, and we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but if you're buying a site privately and someone says, well, listen, you came to me, I don't really know what the thing is worth, you have to give me a price, then the best thing you can do before you know more about the details of the site is to give them a very broad range. And just say, well, sites like yours, on average, can go from anywhere from this to this. And it could be a big range. I mean, actually, the bigger the better. Because then it'll show them that, hey, at least you're giving them some actual numbers, but you're then telling them, but what dictates that are things like history, earnings, traffic, backlinks, such and such. So we'll get into more of that in a minute, but just keep that in mind. If you're the buyer, try to make the seller name a price. But if you have to, give a broad range until you have a chance to do more due diligence. Now, I think this is another important thing to remember when you're negotiating. Just make sure that you know time is your friend. What I found personally is that the longer the negotiation is drawn out, the better it usually is for me as a buyer. The more committed they are. The seller kind of gets in their mind, they've almost sold the thing and they're ready to be done with it. And then if for some reason something falls out at the last minute, they're heartbroken. And so the longer it draws out, generally speaking, that's better for the buyer. Now this is a topic that I'm fascinated with, and I think I would highly, highly recommend you all take away something from this, not because it's earth-shatteringly important, but because it just works. And it's a way to, when we look at business, I mean, we all know business is not easy. Making money is not easy. If it were, everyone would do it. And so when we're talking about a topic like buying and selling websites, there's marketplaces like Flippa that are great, that have all these amazing sites, but then you're dealing with public information, and marketplaces are pretty darn efficient. If something comes out there, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to buy something that's of value, right? Especially in a public setting. Well, imagine if you could go and solicit someone to buy a site that's not for sale, that they haven't even thought about selling, and that you can buy it without anyone else knowing about it. I mean, not only is that the best kind of site to buy for my money, but it's the way I've found the absolute best deals over the years I've done this. So I kind of want to walk you through the process and how that works. So when I say buying sites privately, for me, it is key. 80 to 90% of the sites that I've bought over the past few years have been privately. This does take time. It's not an easy thing. I'm going to walk you through in a minute kind of how I do that. But it's just the best way to do it, and a couple reasons why. A, you've got a site that's not for sale, so there's not people bidding against you. But B, when you do this right, you can go through and find sites that site owners have kind of left, almost they've kind of just put them off, they haven't really spent a lot of time on them, that may still very well be getting good traffic, maybe revenue, but they've almost kind of left them just to die. And they don't really know what to do. So you may be kind of a white knight when you come along and say, hey, I'd be happy to buy this thing for you. And they go, well, hey, I've never even thought about that, but I don't have time for it anymore, or I've never, the person that was working for me, quit. You'll be shocked at the stories you'll hear from people. One story that's kind of funny about this, just to prove how valuable this can be and why the price thing, I should have said this a second ago, is so important. A couple years ago, there was a site I was looking at. I do a lot in the WordPress space now. We develop themes and do a lot of stuff in that space. But there was a site that I was looking to buy, and it was a great site. And just from the little I knew about it, I probably would have paid $5,000 to $10,000 or more, just from the traffic that I could tell it was getting. Well, I emailed this guy, and he emails me back, and he goes, first he goes, well, what site were you talking about? He goes, I have 100 sites, and I have the same contact form on every one of them, and I don't know which one you were asking me about. And I hadn't named the site in the email, so I didn't know what he was talking about. I'd sent out probably 20 emails that day. So we were both sitting there like, I don't know. And so finally I said, well, do you have any sites in the WordPress space? And he goes, oh yeah, I've got this. And we finally narrowed down which one it was. And so that was kind of funny. But then I go, so would you be interested in selling it? And he basically was like, yeah. And I said, well, is there kind of a price you have? And this is all email, we're not talking. So in my mind, I'm thinking $5,000 to $10,000 at least, probably even a little more. He comes back and he says, I'll sell it for $800. And I go, that's the great thing about email. You can't show, there's no emotion. So you can just kind of, I was jumping around in my office in my head, but I take a while and I email him back and I go, okay, I guess I'll do it for $800. And then he goes, well, now that I know you're interested in it, maybe I'll just list it on Flippa and you can go bid on it. And I was like, well, I don't really think that's fair. I mean, here, you said you do it. So anyway, we agreed on $1,200, which was still an unbelievable price. And, that proves two things. One, it was a private site. He wasn't trying to sell it. It was just one of his 100 or so sites that he had. And he was happy to get rid of it because he just wasn't maintaining it anymore. And two, when it came down to the terms and the price, I really was, if I would have come out and said, hey, I'll pay you $10,000 for it, I have a feeling, knowing this guy, he probably would have gone, if he's thinking 800 and I say 10,000, any smart person's going to go, well, shoot, maybe this thing's worth a whole lot more than I thought, so how about 20,000? And then, it would have not been a good deal at that point. So the takeaway from that is really to take each deal on a case-by-case basis. All these things I'm saying to you are good, just general things to know, but every person, everything is going to be different, so just keep that in mind as you're going through. So here's what I do. I go to Google if there's a niche or a site or a market I'm trying to get into, and I just start searching organic listings. Now, obviously, we know in the post-Penguin, post-Panda world, we have a lot more challenges to face than we did years ago. So you want to be real careful with what you're doing. But this is what I do. I go through, I find 30, 50, 100 sites. I will send out an email that is something like this, and I'm just going to tell you real fast so you can know it. It just says, hey, so-and-so, I've got a rather strange question for you. Have you ever considered selling your site? I know this isn't something you get asked every day, so I don't need an answer right away, but if you'd be interested in talking more about it, I'd love to chat with you. Let me know. That's it. And my goal with that, and your goal with that, should be a response. All you want to get at this point is a response. You want to get the ball rolling, so then you can start working on the negotiation, the discussing, the terms, and finding out more about the site. What I found is that email works great. Because, we all probably get 100 emails a day. We read half of them. And if it's a long form email that's like 12 paragraphs and you're trying to, do all this stuff, they're not going to read it. And they might not even get it. So if you send something short and sweet and just try to get the ball rolling, more times than not, you'll find that can at least get your foot in the door. And that's really the point with this, with that email, is to get your foot in the door. The final thing is just, when you get that response, if you get that response, remember that at this point, you have to interview them just as much as they're interviewing you. Don't think just because you get a response, like, oh, hey, this is a great sign, I need to sell this, I need to buy this thing, or whatever. That's when the work begins. That's when you get to start finding out more about their site, finding out more about how they've made money, this kind of stuff. Finally, I would just say, don't buy or sell out of emotion. We can get really tied to deals all of a sudden, and we feel like, oh, I can't let this thing go, I've spent too much time, working this out. If you find yourself feeling that way, then you probably could use some objective third-party advice of just helping you look at it through a rational lens. You don't want to overpay, obviously. You don't want to operate out of emotion. So hopefully those are a few things that will help you kind of think through the negotiation and the finding sites. And if you have any other questions, feel free to come up to me afterwards. This finding sites thing I think is fantastic. And the buying and selling just in general, I tell people this all the time. If you're going to be in this industry, buying a site is the best way. I mean, I'm talking internet marketing. Buying an established website is the best way to grow in this industry, because you can find a site that's already established, already has traffic, hopefully making some money, and then build on it from there. So thank you, guys.
Okay, hi. My name is Jason Yelowitz. I'm a broker at Quiet Light Brokerage. So far, most of what we've heard about is buying sites. You buy enough of them, you do a good enough job, eventually you might think about selling your site. Now, we know about the marketplaces, Flippa, and some of the others that Chuck had mentioned. Those are great if your site is relatively small. If it's worth $500, $10,000, $20,000. Once you get to a certain size, maybe 200 grand, $500,000, something like that, it's probably worth talking to a broker, because we tend to attract not only a different type of buyer, but we can often help you, get things in order so that you can sell for top dollar, and usually more for a cash deal as opposed to some of these earnouts or seller finance deals or that kind of thing. My personal history, I was a super affiliate for 4 years. I had a site that was phenomenal. It was making, on average, about $2 million a year in profit. Took 30 minutes a day of work. It was incredible. Of course, I wanted to cash out. I wanted to sell it, and I blew my opportunity. I didn't know how to sell it. I didn't know how to find a buyer. Next thing you know, the industry I was in, which was real estate leads, we all know what happened to housing, off a cliff. So I determined I'm going to figure out, how do you do well when you want to sell a bigger site? So ultimately, whether a buyer is a strategic buyer or an investment buyer, the big question they're asking themselves is, how much money am I as the buyer going to make in the long run? It's not all from cash flow. It's cash flow plus resale. So even if you have a site that was worth this much, but it's a little bit on the decline, it still has value. The value has gone down for sure, but a buyer can still ultimately earn, X amount from the profits and then resell it and recoup their investment. So one thing that's important, as I think Chuck mentioned, no one cares what you think the potential of your site is. What bigger buyers tend to care about is, what have you actually done? What are they going to get out of the site? And the real answer is, nobody knows for certain. It's all estimates. Everybody has metrics that they use to try to determine it, but no one knows for sure how much is the site going to make over time. So we've already had enough people talk about what buyers look for and what metrics they're looking at. Some of these are out of your control, but there's a few things that are well within your control that can seriously increase the value of your site. I'm going to jump to number 3 on there. The quality of the bookkeeping. It blows my mind when I see a site that should be worth $1 million and the seller doesn't have a profit and loss statement, and when I ask him or her to get one, they send me something in Excel that they put together in 20 minutes where they estimated what they've earned for each month of the last 3 years. It's not the way. If you want to get top dollar, hire a bookkeeper. Costs a couple $100, and it buys you so much more credibility with big buyers. The other 2 things I'm going to get to that you have some control over are the last 2 bullets. So the seller's demeanor and candor. This is huge. I think the question to ask yourself is if you were going to spend $1 million on a site, are you going to buy from a seller that you think is shady? Obviously, the answer is no. No one will do that, but very often we'll find sellers who they don't want to reveal things. I had one guy who gave me a fake name. He actually signed a contract, and after I brought him an offer that was multi-million-dollar, I found out what his real name was. That deal did not close. The guy was a scum. Don't be a scum. You know, buyers are pretty savvy at this level, so they're going to use their gut feel. So you want to be the kind of person that you would want to work with if the roles were reversed. So what are some things you can do to give yourself the credibility to try to get top dollar? First thing is, don't lie about anything. Very, very few businesses that are actually for sale are perfect. There are perfect businesses. Usually they're not for sale. So don't be afraid to explain to your broker, you know, look, here's why I'm selling. Things declined a little, or I had a rough month, or I got hit by a Google algorithm update. If there's bad news, it's important to disclose it early, and I'll give you an example. Last Wednesday, I launched a new site. It was valued at around $500,000. We sent it out to our list of buyers. An hour after we sent it, the seller sent me an email, said, oh my gosh, I left out a massive expense in my profit and loss statement. So he disclosed it early. He wasn't trying to hide anything. It was an honest mistake. I sent emails to all the buyers who had inquired on that, and I said, guys, we screwed up. We left out this big expense. Here's the correct numbers. We're lowering the asking price. We're very sorry about it. It was an accidental mistake. No one batted an eye. I got an offer this morning, so it was only 3 or 4 days from start to finish. If, after we got the offer this morning, we would have disclosed the mistake, you can bet your bottom dollar that the buyer would disappear. I've already talked about keeping clean books. A couple of people have talked about keeping clean web stats. Google Analytics is preferred. And then the other thing is to do your prep work and have reasonable expectations. I'll meet sellers who have a fantastic site, and they'll call me and say, okay, can you get this sold in a week? No. You know, on Flippa, sure. If you've got a site worth $1,000, Flippa will get it sold in a couple of days. If you got a site that's worth $500,000, buyers are going to want to take their time. They're going to want to get to know you. They're going to want to kick the tires. So take the time and organize ahead of time. Be prepared for the unexpected and have reasonable expectations. Buyers are going to ask for a lot of data. They're going to ask for access to your Google Analytics. They're going to want to see your profit and loss statement. They're going to want to know the PIN code on your ATM card. You know, probably not the last one. But it's important to realize that if you do things right, the odds are in your favor that the site's going to sell. The natural tendency is to be paranoid and say, well, wait, you know, I don't want to share that. The numbers are in your favor. If we have enough buyers looking at something, the odds are one of them's going to want it. It's going to make the other person want it a little more. So it's important to kind of get comfortable with the concept of sharing. If the buyer meets you in person or wants to talk on the phone, you know, if you come off like, well, I'm selling you the site, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing next, it's going to make the buyer worried. They're going to say, well, how do I know you're not going to start another site and compete with me, or you don't already have one? The more you can get to know them on a human basis, the more they're going to trust you, the more they're going to pay. And what I mentioned before is, put yourself in their shoes. Once we're up to a certain level of site, $500,000, $1 million, would you pay that much money for your site if you didn't already own it? And if not, what would it take to get you to feel comfortable doing that? So another rule is, in today's market, don't be greedy. You want to go back to 2007? Be greedy. Today's market is a different world. Generally, buyers aren't going to fight for a deal unless it's underpriced. We do get bidding wars. Very often that means that the site was underpriced. In general, buyers have to get more comfortable. They're not going to fight for it. There does tend to be a market value on sites. As I think Dave pointed out, with strategic buyers, they'll often pay more, but there's an irony to it. To get a strategic buyer to pay more, they need to call you. We've experimented with this, where I've called them, and what goes through their mind is, oh, you must be desperate. I'll make you a low ball offer. So if you're actively trying to sell your site, there tends to be a market cap, kind of like with your house. If you try to price your house double the market, no one's even going to come to the open house. So if your needs are greater than what the market will bear, don't sell it. All right? Otherwise, you're probably likely to be disappointed. Most of the deals that we put out there where we follow the rules do sell, probably 75%, give or take. But I want to give you a couple case studies of sites that did not sell. So I had a site. It was one of these press release sites. It was very good. We got through due diligence. The buyer was happy. The seller was happy. The buyer stumbled upon, there was a minor lawsuit that the seller was involved with a couple years ago. Wasn't the seller's fault. The seller settled for a couple $1,000. It was some sort of a patent troll thing. The fact that the seller did not disclose this killed the deal. So this goes back to what I said before. If there's bad news, disclose it early and often, because that'll buy you credibility. I had a web design site where the guy wanted to sell a couple years ago, and he was willing to take a price that was way below market value. But the thing is, he wanted to trade that to find a buyer that would not do due diligence. So if I said to you, look, my site's worth 200 grand, I'm going to give it to you for 100, but just take my word on the numbers, what would you do? Exactly. We did not sell it. And ironically, we attracted probably the worst buyer that we've known, a guy that does due diligence ad nauseum and has done that and walked away from 6 deals. So it backfires. You cannot trade, giving the buyer an opportunity to double check things for price unless you're at the very low end. And then the last one I told you about, this was a site that was worth millions. We actually got offers, but the seller was so sleazy, lying about his name, his location. He didn't have a phone number. It was like he was living in the Batcave. That ultimately, not only couldn't we close a deal, it's unclosable. We worked with other brokers. Nobody could get this thing to close. So if I had to conclude, the most important thing, be real and be realistic. And then also be prepared. So once you get the offer, we're not done. The buyer's going to do due diligence. They're going to double check the things that you've told them. They're going to double check the numbers, the stats. And I describe it as it's like a colonoscopy, but not as fun. They really dig in pretty deep. And sometimes sellers are surprised by that. It's important to be prepared. Due diligence is not fun. If your site is worth a certain value, very often you'll end up with a better value with a broker even after the commission than without. And we always encourage people, experiment both ways. If people balk at paying a commission, I say, okay, put it on Flippa first. If you can do better, that's phenomenal. Generally, our market studies have indicated we can get you a better value in general. And then finally, let the system work. If you are working with a broker and he or she is giving you suggestions, some people put up their defenses and say, no, that doesn't apply to me. In general, it works, and when we follow the system, most of the deals close. Okay, thank you so much.
So we've got a little bit of time left. If anybody wants to come up to the mic, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer some stuff.
question. When you buy a site, let's say it's a WordPress site or other, and the transfer of the property to you, do you typically take over their hosting account, or do you try to transfer the assets from their hosting account over to your hosting account? What's been your experience there?
So me personally, I like to leave the stuff where it is if possible. So if I have the opportunity to take over a hosting account, I will do that, because you don't want to make a lot of changes, and you never know what Google's going to do. Sometimes, though, you know, it's just easier to transfer the stuff over. Sometimes it's not even an option. You also have to be careful if you're taking over their account, whether, you know, passwords and things like that. So, anybody else?
We've done both.
Yeah, I've done both too.
Well, first of all, thanks, guys. That was really great. Secondly, the valuation numbers were kind of thrown around using the terms income and revenue, like 3 times, 5 times. I mean, can you give me maybe a solid number on a site that's worth maybe a few $100,000 if it's 3 years times annual revenue or net income, or what you guys think it should be?
And I saw that on yours. You said like gross revenue.
Yeah.
When you put that, you meant net, like net profit, right? Not the gross.
Yeah, the way I was calculating gross is typically what happens is we look at the top line number of revenue minus out the cost of goods sold.
Okay.
So that's the gross sales. I mean, obviously there's other expenses, paying people and hosting and all that other stuff. I don't take that into account. It's in a lot of those sites out there, it's that cost of goods sold that I will take out. The rest of the expenses I don't. But that's me personally. I do that.
And how many times, I guess? What was the number?
Yeah, for us, to give you a solid number, it depends. So there's some sites that don't have any cost of sales to them, and so it's different. But for me, on average, we're in the, say, 1 year is probably on average our number that we look at sites for.
What we typically see in our brokerage is we calculate what's called seller's discretionary earnings. So that's your bottom line profit, but then we add back, like if you're paying yourself a salary, that's discretionary. We're going to add that to your profit. If you're making your car payment out of your business, we're going to add that back. When we get a final number, generally most buyers are willing to, you know, you take what you earn in a year, let's say it's stable, most buyers will pay 2 to 3 times the annual seller's discretionary earnings, subject to, you know, this and that and the other.
So, and I typically would somewhat disagree with him, because he says you add back the salary of the owner, but if the owner's doing work, then that's a cost that I'm going to have to pay. And I was actually looking at a deal with them, and I gave them a number. They're like, "Where'd you come up with this number?" I'm like, "Well, the guy is working 40 hours a week. Yep. You know, what do I have to pay somebody to work that time? Because I'm an investment, I'm not buying a job."
Although, in fairness, that often gets factored into the multiple. So when I say 2 to 3 times the annual, if it's a full-time job, it's going to be 2 times the annual. If it takes you 5 minutes a day, it'll be at the higher end.
Right, but we're all talking about net. Nobody pays you based on the gross of what your site. If your site brings in $1 million but makes 0 profit, nobody's going to pay you a multiple of $1 million. It's the profit.
Correct.
Yeah, and just to clarify, on most of these websites, there's very little expenses. That's why I base it on the after cost of goods sold, because it's a retail site and they've got a bunch of costs of goods. That's why you do it. But like you're saying, in many cases, the expenses, there's not a lot there.
Right, that's typical with the web businesses. But
yeah.
Thanks a lot for clarifying, guys.
I have several questions.
Can you speak into the mic, please? Right in front of you.
Oh, I have several questions.
Speak into the mic.
I said I have several questions because I've been kind of looking at websites.
Can't hear you.
Oh, I have several questions
Yes.
because I've been looking at various different models, from curation websites with AdSense to e-commerce websites like Wayfair, or other ones that have a whole niche of article marketing, but yet they'll do it in different categories. So, and then I've looked at just product sites that might hit every single different, like in the furniture industry or things like that. When you talk about your buying websites and things like that, they all have their own different issues, whether it's returns or whether it's hiring people for content. What is the value, or how do you figure when you buy a site how much you have to spend to increase the revenue. No one ever talks about how much money you really need to increase it. You bought it, that's great, but then you've got to make it grow. How do you figure those things, and how do you do it with in an automated site that might be curation with AdSense versus Wayfair, which is a huge company that does a lot of branded items, or a drugstore.com, which has several that they purchased. How do you do that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that's a pretty hard question to answer like that, because it really does. I mean, I tend to focus on sites in one particular vertical, and so when I'm looking at something, I know already there's a certain way I'm going to grow it and grow that one. I mean, it's hard to say that a furniture site, what I would do for that would be very different from a site that I would buy that was monetized via, you know, a digital product versus a site that I bought that sold potpourri. I mean, they all are going to be very unique to the niche that I'm in. One thing I would say, if I do understand what you're asking correctly, is it sounds like you're looking at a lot of different
business models, right,
types of, you know, industries and whatnot. And that can seem like a good, and if you can make that work, that's great. For me, I've found anytime I can really find one or two key verticals and kind of stick within that and get really good at identifying undervalued sites in that vertical and then growing that, I find that it's easier to build up a considerable business that way than to try to find sites in many different and non-related verticals and try to increase revenue there. But to answer your first question, there's not really a set number when I buy a site that I say, here's what it's going to take me to double the revenue. Because there are some sites that I've bought that have no revenue, but they have a lot of traffic. And that traffic is worth something to me. So then I kind of, based upon what I know, since it's in a vertical I'm already familiar with, what I know the other sites have taken me to either add a product to sell or to add more affiliate, you know, offers to promote. It gives me somewhat of a benchmark to start with because I'm sticking within a vertical I'm already somewhat familiar with.
So like if you were in the finance business, everything would be vertical, all the related products to finance, for example.
Correct. I would try as much as I can to stay within that financial umbrella of sites.
What do you consider a good
I'm sorry,
amount?
we're
What do
running
you
out of time.
oh.
Can we just get to the next question? Just come up and ask afterwards if you could. I'm sorry.
Thanks, guys. I have a question about domains. I assume that we're talking about websites here. These are like, thinking about real estate. They're cash flowing rental properties as opposed to domains. They're just like raw land, right? So understanding that that's a different kind of animal. Working with a portfolio, large portfolio of domains, any advice as to how to, you know, value these domains? And secondly, low cost, high volume ways to get them up and going.
You know, at our brokerage, we hardly touch domains. We've sold a couple premium domains. The truth is, from what I can see with domains, it's a lot more like horse trading. It's a lot more what will someone pay, which is how Dave started off, as opposed to the cash flowing websites. There are experts in this. I think Cedo.com is a good place to look. There's a forum called dnforum.com. And I think there's going to be people that are very knowledgeable from the selling perspective in those places. And
I would kind of go along with what David said earlier about, you know, you're going to get more money if you have somebody approach you as opposed to if you're trying to sell. So, and we've just been told that we're out of time. So if you have some specific questions you want to come up and ask us.